is a very highly charged ideological doctrine that teaches a particular perspective.
When the Vice President of America feels inclined to explain to Canadians what is wrong with our country, that's probably because it's really, really bad. JD Vance absolutely ripped a piece off of the CBC just a few hours ago in a very unexpected rant. I'm Jasmine Lane. Subscribe, like, follow, and comment your thoughts down below. Share this video as well, and only then maybe more people will realize that Canada is not being bullied by literally anybody other than our own government and own media, who need you to feel weak, dependent, small, scared. Also, I feel like I need to issue an apology over something that I said the other day. I still stand by every word of it, but maybe a little bit more context into where my head was at the time. Oh, and according to Mark Carney's office, a deal has been signed. A trade deal has been signed. Or has it? When you look into the details of this one, it looks a lot more like optics than anything of substance. We will see. We'll pick it apart. You can be the judge of that one.
But he also wants us to believe that he saved 2 economies. But when we look at his actions, they tell us otherwise. But as poor as his actions are, his own words speak even stronger. People will charge me with being elitist or with globalist, which happens to be exactly what we need. That means, Mr. Speaker, the Prime Minister will always put his wealthy friends first. He will always put nations before Canada. His loyalty does not lie with Canada or with Canadians. He has told us in his own words exactly who he is. And when somebody tells you who they are, you should believe them.
I think that right there is the crux of our biggest problem in Canada, because it's not just, oh, the economy's bad. It is so much deeper than that. It is. There is a whole cultural and ideological shift that has been taking place it makes you feel crazy sometimes. And it's also really eye-opening to see the targets that they place on certain people for an end goal that they want, and to see the way in which Canadian citizens fall right into those traps.
Today, the international security environment is more complex and it's more dangerous than at any time since the end of the Cold War. The rules-based international order, an order that has supported decades of stability, decades of unprecedented prosperity, is being challenged on multiple fronts. They are real, immediate, and consequential for every nation represented here. And that's why we've come to Halifax, to renew our commitment to democracy, to defend freedom, human dignity, and the rule of law, and to strengthen the partnerships that allow us to face adversity together.
I need you to hear me when I say that the pattern here is very, very notable. This whole concept, it's very classic Mark Carney speak. And to pull some examples of that too, I mean, look no further than the whole climate stuff that he's been involved in. How did all of that become a focal point for governments? It was due to similar wording. The world is going to end. People are going to be wiped out. There's going to be these insane disasters. We have to do this. You have to invest in this company, in this technology, in this ideology, if you want to survive. Otherwise, the human race will be extinct, right? Like this really intense, scary language that makes people feel as though they have to comply or they're a bad person, or they have to comply or they'll be to blame for this scary thing that's to come. And it works. That has worked historically in so many different regimes with so many products that get sold. But this whole concept of messaging being the world is more dangerous, divided, unprecedented global risks.
I'm going to suggest in my few minutes that Unite, Act, Deliver is also how we should describe the historic transformation that's now underway in Canada. And the first aspect of this is unity. Because as Jean knows, and those of you who live in Canada and are active in Canada, Canadians have become united in the face of the fundamental change in U.S. trade policy. That's their choice. That's their right. but they have fundamentally changed their trade policy. We've become united in the face of a more dangerous and divided world and in the face of the opportunities, but also the challenges of accelerating technological change.
This is very new and incredibly important to try to understand why we are where we are today. Historically, Canadian leaders would have never in a million years gone up on stage and opened every single announcement with that same fear-mongering language. And it's interesting that all of that language, which every Liberal minister started suddenly putting as the first line in all of their announcements, if you go on the Government of Canada website and go through their announcements, it is almost every single article has something about dangerous, divided, unprecedented, risk, scary, blah, 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 hinge moment, all of that stuff in it. And honestly, even just as an example, so Mark Carney is in the UAE. He allegedly announced some big announcement. I'll dive into the details of that because it's not quite what it seems. But even in that statement, it says, the world is more dangerous and divided. The scale and speed of recent trade shifts and technological developments mean Canada's economic strategy must change dramatically on a mission to double our non-US exports. Good luck with that one. But what you're hearing here is really just textbook for fear framing. And it is so important to recognize when this new political messaging started being implemented around foreign interference scandals, big ones, a collapsing domestic approval, economic stagnation, pressure from the United States of America, crumbling international credibility, as well as a lot of domestic political dissatisfaction. And now this messaging about how horrible, scary, and dangerous everything is constant. And that's not a coincidence. That's not because it's true. It's because it's a strategy that's really controlling and manipulative intentionally and subconsciously, because you see those things enough and it leaves you with an impression. It leaves you with a feeling. And one of the biggest takeaways from this too is when they talk about this dangerous, divided world, shifting trades, blah, blah, blah. The other important part to note is that that was due to Donald Trump. That's why that rhetoric started. Did Donald Trump increase tariffs? Yes, on almost every country in the world. Yes. Have countries historically had tariffs? Yes. Did President Joe Biden increase tariffs on Canada? Yes. Was the media insanity like this? Absolutely not. Where was the outrage there? But that's because the outrage wasn't supposed to be for Biden. You know, he's one of them, presumably. The outrage is supposed to be for Trump. We're blaming this on Trump. He is the problem. It's always, always, always Trump. And our media has been nonstop constant with that messaging, haven't they? Why are they doing that? And, you know, yesterday I was so disgusted by this rhetoric that was going around about Pete Hoekstra. And I'll be honest, I apologize for how I presented that story. If you want to watch it, you can. I stand by everything that I said, but I was very emotionally charged in that episode. And that's not really how I like to present myself. That's not how I want you to present yourself either. That's not how we win. We win by fact checking, which is exactly what we're going to do here because this story is still very much the front page news.
Like I said, on the F-35, we've got all kinds of people and companies that are involved. You know, from an economic standpoint and a military cooperation standpoint, you know, the F-35 has been a phenomenal success. It's not an American plane. It's an international plane.
And this topic of the F-35s, wow, has it ever shown how few people actually have a hot clue what's going on? And this is the problem with media misinformation. I'll use that word. That's exactly what it is. Or lies is another word, is that people think that because something is posted by National News Watch, because it's posted by the Toronto Star, it's true. That's the media, right? It must be telling the truth. Ooh, except it's not, because the headline reads, future of trade talks depends on Canada's purchase of American fighter jets, the U.S. ambassador says. He didn't say that, though, and I'll prove that to you in just a few moments here. But it led to a slew of some of the most vitriolic, insane stuff I've seen on the internet in a really long time, such as this from Co-op Tory, who writes, economic terrorism to determine our defense policy, cancel the F-35s and buy the Gripens, whatever the cost to trade. We won't negotiate with terrorists. Sovereignty first. That headline, which went incredibly viral over something Pete Hoekstra never said and never insinuated either, also led to this change.org petition getting widely shared again to remove Pete Hoekstra as U.S. ambassador to Canada. Over 14,000 people signed it. So a fake headline led to that. This is why it's so important to do your own research, because here is what Pete Hoekstra actually said.
Yeah, because it's high tech. Well, that's technology that we shared across the border, that you've got a company, you've got companies in Canada that are learning and developing and probably contributed to the development of that technology that you can use on future products and future efforts. And you know, you got all these people making these planes. We built 1,000 of them already. We've got more than 2,000 on back order. And so it's a great example of good coordination. But, you know, Canada's going through a review of their defense industry.
Exactly. And,
okay.
And importantly for us to do this is something that obviously this sector supports, a review and a renewal of that capacity.
Well, we got to figure out exactly, you know, we need to know what it means that you're going to build a Canadian defense infrastructure.
Right.
You know, there might be some that would say, we already have one. Well, and the problem is with some of it, it's like, it's got American logos on the building. I mean, I think of the General Dynamics plant in London.
Yes.
I've gone through there. I don't know if, when I went through the plant, I don't know if I ran into an American. Okay, it's American Canadian investment. It's on Canadian soil. It's all Canadian workers, and these kinds of things. Is that a Canadian product or not? For U.S. purposes, when Canada, a Canadian supplier, military supplier, ships product to the U.S., we consider that American content.
And so that's a great segue, because, you know, obviously, and we would agree entirely, Canada and the U.S. have built things together for decades. We're good at that. We're good at integrating our economies. We're good at collaborating.
Future of trade talks depends on Canada's purchase of American fighter jets, U.S. ambassador says. I don't know, did you get that? Is that what he said? Or even insinuated at all? Because as far as I can tell, he never issued a threat. He emphasized how coordination between Canada and the U.S. has been amazing for many, many decades. He explained how Canada already benefits from this. He explicitly said that the F-35s is a multinational program. It was a really clean, simple comment about saying we hear Canada is looking at changing some of their policies when it comes to security, and we're curious about what that is. That's all. That's all that he said. And somehow that got twisted into economic terrorism and trade blackmail, and the internet just ran wild with it. Now, some people will say, well, the fact that he even brought up the F-35s to begin with is proof. Except that he brought up the F-35s after having another discussion about how F-35s were recently purchased by another nation. So it was relevant in context to what they were talking about. But nobody watched. They just ran with the headline. And it's really weird to me to hear people use words like terrorism to describe the United States of America when CBC has to issue alerts like this on who Carney is really trying to partner up with right now.
But the other thing notable here, again, going back to sort of the culture and the controversy perhaps with this visit, you do have to park some of your maybe ethical principles at the door when you are dealing with the Emiratis. I would note CBC's own reporting and some concerns human rights advocates had about this trip. Canadian-made rifles that were sent to the UAE, exported to the UAE, according to the visual investigations team at CBC, were seen in the hands of militia in Sudan's civil war, militia linked with atrocities in that conflict. And not a lot of transparency about whether the Prime Minister directly raised that issue with the Emiratis, who are supporting those militia forces, those paramilitary forces in that conflict, or took any kind of a stand or made any kind of insistence on language to ensure that sort of Canadian goods wouldn't, through a back door, end up in a circumstance like that, which wouldn't be in keeping with Canadian foreign policy. The world is a complicated place, but without more access and more transparency on how these conversations actually go, the readouts are a bit vague in terms of what was discussed, and this remains a big concern for the human rights community here.
Funny, I haven't seen any similar headlines like that about that story at all. Mark Carney was questioned by press there if he addressed that situation with them. He claims that he did. I don't know if that's true. Seems like a really weird thing to say to somebody in person when you're on their turf. And what are they going to respond back? That's not true. And what are you going to say? Okay. The whole thing just seems like nothing but theater. And speaking of a lot of theater, J.D. Vance, the Vice President of the United States of America, and presumably the future President of the United States of America, he had a very unexpected, random point to make today about Canada that is really important given today's discussions, where he says, while I'm sure the causes are complicated, no nation has leaned more into diversity is our strength. We don't need a melting pot. We have a salad bowl. Immigration insanity than Canada. It has the highest foreign-born share of the population in the entire G7, and its living standards have stagnated. And he shared this post from Michael A. Arouet, who writes, what happened in Canada will be studied by many historians and economists as the prime example of self-destruction of an otherwise prosperous nation after blindly following left ideology.
Let's be frank, DEI is a very highly charged ideological doctrine that teaches a particular perspective about colonialism and white settlement. And you have to ask the question, what are we trying to get to with that? Are we trying to get to a point where we have fairness in hiring and a diversity of people who are hired into positions, or are we trying to socially engineer some kind of narrative? So I think that it's pretty clear that there's a difference between those two things, and we certainly support merit-based hiring and making sure that we're removing any barriers.
He continued in another post, writing, and with all due respect to my Canadian friends whose politics focus obsessively on the United States, your stagnating living standards have nothing to do with Donald Trump or whatever boogeyman the CBC tells you to blame. The fault lies with your leadership, elected by you.
The Minister of Finance will lead a delegation of Canada's pension funds. $2 trillion of capital, which almost begins to sound significant in the UAE. $2 trillion in capital, the Canadian pension funds. They will come here next year early to deepen existing partnerships and develop new investment opportunities together.
Imagine being a country that can't just say, we're going to invest $2 trillion into you, like, what the UAE or Saudi Arabia just did the other day with Donald Trump. They have to specify, because we don't have $2 trillion, that we're going to invest our pension funds into you specifically, because that's really all that we have. And to be fair, it's not weird at all for pension funds to be invested abroad. In fact, a lot of them are invested in the United States of America. There's real estate in Europe and stuff like that too. So that's not unnormal. You have to diversify internationally to try to maximize returns, right? There's nothing wrong with that. But the controversy here is not so much about the investment, it's about the political framing in which Mark Carney is speaking with an acknowledgement that the pension system is at an arm's length from him. He's speaking as though he controls a $2 trillion sovereign wealth fund. That's what he said. He said that. And this is where anybody who is invested in, and this is where anybody who knows anything about pensions should be really concerned, because the CPP and the QPP are not government assets. They belong to workers, retirees, and contributors. They do not belong to Mark Carney. They do not belong to cabinet, and they certainly do not belong to the Minister of Finance. They are legally independent. So when he speaks of them in such a way publicly abroad as though they are this deployable capital, that's in breach breach of pretty well every political norm. And so for him to say, we will bring pension funds to the UAE to deepen investment opportunities together, it sounds like he's doing something that is explicitly not allowed, which is coordinating investment strategy with them, integrating pensions into foreign policy, and using CPP as diplomatic leverage. That is absolutely insane. And also very notable that it happened in the UAE, an autocratic state heavily involved in geopolitical power plays, many of which Canada is actively and vehemently against, accused by the UN of supporting certain militias in Sudan, under scrutiny by many nations, including the US, for AI and their Chinese ties, and also known for aggressive state capital strategies. Remember all the times when there would be topics about the CPP that came up and they'd say, you know, it's protected from political interference, can't be used for political gain, it's independent. Mark Carney grabbed all of that and said, I don't really care. My people are scared over here. They want me to get a deal. This justifies it. Do you see where that pattern kicks in again? Because the Liberals then will say, but we got a huge deal. Did you, though?
Speaker, the Prime Minister is spinning that he negotiated a great deal with the UAE. It's such a great deal that the text is nowhere to be found. No details have been provided. And as far as these so-called investment commitments go, there is no timeline. So a simple question. On what date can we expect to see the first dollar of investment from the UAE? Just a date, please.
Fun fact, they didn't give one. But nonetheless, that has not stopped the Canadian press, of course, from writing a headline that reads, Carney secures $70 billion investment pledge from the UAE as he concludes visit. And I wonder how they're going to be talking about that, as though it is a fact, as though anything is signed, and as though the UAE has publicly announced this as well. Fun fact, as of the time of me filming this video right now, they haven't. So you only have Carney saying that I've secured a deal, but they didn't announce it. There was no photos. There was no nothing actually at all, just him saying it. And apparently that makes it truth. I'm Jasmine Lane. Thank you so much for watching. Subscribe, like, follow, and comment your thoughts down below. Share this video as well, and I will talk to you tomorrow.